What's the dealio? The Royal Rumble. You love to see it. We got the patron request from G. He says, how about your dream Holy Grail war? What service would you like to see summoned, and what Holy Grail war system would you use? By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the Patreon. You get access to early content and priority on your requests. Now, admittedly, this is something that hasn't necessarily been on my mind, so what I'm about to do will be a little more impromptu. So ideally, with the concept like this, you would normally opt to a scenario where multiple fake characters would meet each other from different series, ones that would certainly never get the chance otherwise, how they would interact, so on and so forth. What I want to see more aligns towards a Nasuverse war. So the people I had in mind are Sion from Melty Blood, CL from Tsukihime, both the Awazaki sisters, that's Toko and Aoko individually, that will be Mihoyo, Shiki Ryogi from Kara no Kyokai, in her base form of course, Arkaway from Tsukihime in her base form. The only person that I really want to see return from Fate is Waiver, and the reason being is that I want him to be a direct answer to himself back in Zero and show us everything that he's learned up until this point so far. All of these characters are going to be in their prime. You might be wondering, why did you put Waiver with all these strong people? Well, here's the thing, because he also brought up what type of a Grail war. So you may have noticed that there's only 7, and that is because I do want the standard 7 masters. Forgive me, I'm old school. I just feel like with so little characters, it gives you a lot of room for bonding because there's not many people to go through. I do think you can juggle a lot of characters like Naruto does with Strange Fate if you have that level of writing, but I want to keep everything tightly packed. That's the agenda. I actually want to use Prisma's system, which will be the class cards. One of the main things that always held Waiver back was the lineage. It was his power. But with things like the class card, he can finally stand foot with other opponents. And he won't have to worry about things like fighting experience because the class cards do deal with that on some level. Not only that, but realistically, and if you've been through El Malloy, you know this, Waiver, barring Sion because he would be right behind her, will be the smartest person here. Again, for the people who may not realize, a lot of times it's bigger than power. And I want Waiver to be there to showcase that. He's gonna be one of those one true curveballs where his intelligence is gonna match their output despite them having that base leverage. And I know many are gonna jump out the gate to say that that would never happen. And I'm like, did we see Fate Zero? Cause I could have sworn it was canon that Waiver was the weakest person there and survived to the end of the war. But maybe I'm misremembering, so I want to take it in that direction with him. As far as the class cards, I don't necessarily have anybody in mind, but just to have something to start off with, they would more than likely have spirits that they've already interacted with throughout the series, at least in some way. So for Waiver, he would have Gray, which would also mean that he would automatically have access to Rongo, which instantly makes it more interesting. The reason that I didn't just go out my way to have him as a scander again is because we've not only been through that, but also we kind of got that with Faker Hephaestion in El Malloy. But what would be interesting is for him to have both. Now I definitely wouldn't mind that. So he could have the Gray and the Scander card, and he can switch back and forth between them as needed. People may not realize, but there's a ton of things that you can do with the Prisma card system. That's why it's so fire. You can switch between the cards, you can layer the cards on top of each other and combine them like Gorgon. You can even be in the class of one card but have the armament of the other. So you could have Waiver using the Iskander card summon his army while also wielding the Rongo of Gray. That can actually happen. So there's a lot of different things that work here. He also has a pair of Mystic Eye killers, so he does have that advantage over people like Toko or Arkaway, for example, who may try to manipulate manipulate that on some level. They would have to get to that mystic code in order to stop it. He's still going to have access to his other mystic codes. Him reconstructing Cana's Hydrodrome into an actual familiar, he can have that as well. As a person that taught at the clock tower and all the connections that he has, I would like for them to be a lot more involved and kind of address situations that normally wouldn't arise in the mage world. For example, how you're not supposed to fight in public. Maybe you have masters like Alco and Toko once again getting into it, but they decide to do it out in the open. And then the Mages Association sends somebody out to get on that. It doesn't exactly have to be Bazette, I wouldn't mind, but I want to see somebody new altogether, or whoever they decide to send. With the inclusion of Sion, her being the smartest person in the Grail War, despite not being the strongest, I feel like it's going to create that good balance, especially with people like Waiver present, where they can go back and forth playing these mind games, because that's really what their characters are known for, especially if we can see them construct something midway through the war that has them overcome certain situations that they couldn't beforehand. Including Sion also means that we're getting that dead apostle aspect, because she is an apostle herself, on top of this being the OG Sion. Waiver's technically the only fake character, because the version of Sion that I want is from Melty Blood. It's her OG version, so she does have access to her version of the Black Barrel replica. She's gonna have her ether light. We may see some situations where the Atlas Academy has to get involved once again, so that's gonna give us more insight into that. For her servant, based on her interactions, could be Nemo, could be Ptolemy. That would just be extra things that she could work with. Could be Kama. Same thing for CL. Her having that dead apostle background means that a lot of the fights can scale upwards off the rip. She's got the church backing her up, which gives us a better look into that. And when I bring these characters into the situation, that's not to say that there can't be guest appearances from these other series, because there definitely can. Maybe here and there, but not too much. I'm just working with the main base. People like Shiki Ryogi, again, she's also a psychic, so whether people realize it or not, Shiki can also fight on that apostle level. I mean, we've literally seen her scale and jump across skyscrapers, so I feel like that would be a lot of fun. I don't really want to do the Void Shiki archetype Earth battle here. If it happens, it happens, but that's not really what I'm going for here. I don't mind them clashing in their base forms though. That's cool. I just know I'd rather save that for another time, and I know if they get into it, everything is going to get blown up. And I'm more so thinking about the scale of the war long term. It's also another reason why I don't want Shiki void summoning into her own class card as a servant, because she could do that. They both could, really. We're definitely going to bring it back home to Fuyuki. When it comes to Arkaway, this is the big one. I've always wanted to see her as her actual self in a Grail War. We kind of got it in Fate Extra, but not really. She was more so there for the sake of fan service, if anything. But here, Arkaway is actually going to be present, and she is going to remember her interactions with people like CL, which is going to amp up the story on that level. As far as her power gap, the thing that I want to do with her isn't exactly what it might seem. So it's not gonna be a situation of Arkaway just showing up and smoking everybody, even though we all know that she could. It's more so going to reach ahead where she may enter a circumstance where she draws so much power that it attracts a force that's greater than her that even she can't deal with, and would only be able to deal with if she entered her archetype form. If there did just so happen to be a Void Shiki clash, I would want it to start out like this. So for Arkaway, what I want to present is something that would even be a wall for her, and there are for sure multiple entities like that in the verse that exist. It really could be any. It could be a type, it could be chaos. I'm not gonna lie, we could go as far to bring in Otto Edom with his Slash Emperor. He can take out types, so by that he would automatically be able to take out Arkaway, not to mention all the things that he would have as a character by design. Honestly, we can just have Otto come from a different planet, and that way he's not held back by things like him needing this grain to create his night arm and things that normally would be in his background. We place that on a different planet and we can still have that underway. Maybe maybe we have a circumstance where another planet had this secret civilization that we didn't know about, and the story of Notes took place there. And then he shows up to Earth. We already know with things like the extraverse that we aren't the only ones there. It's just that our information so far is limited. So that definitely could be a thing. We can bring in Gun God from Notes with the original Black Barrel as yet another wild card to the war, possibly having him even team up with Waiver to balance out that initial lack in power against these other opponents. All we'd have to do is the same as the type, rewrite his background so he fits into the story. You know, making sure his weapon doesn't rely on grain being in the atmosphere unless it naturally gets to that point, but it's still being able to do some lethal damage to entities on that type level. I don't want to get too crazy because we really could bring it off, but I think those things as a base alone would make for a very interesting story, one that we haven't seen before at all. Because again, all these characters post time skip, they're in their prime, they think differently, they operate differently, they're way more powerful, smarter, and they're going against levels of opponents that they've never had to deal with before, even by their own standard. So that would kind of be the core of what I want to work with. And when you think about it, this isn't anything unfamiliar. Every war usually has some type of circumstance where the cast has to overcome it, something that's bigger than them. So in Zero, you had Jill's monster. In UB-Dub, you had Gil bringing out the Greater Grail with Shinji. In Heaven's Field, you had the second Grail with Sakura. In Strange Fake, you have Ishtar and her temple. Apocrypha, you have the Spartacus amalgamation, or the Hanging Gardens, where Joan was forced to get more involved. This is really just running the regular course.